So today, I'm in the habit of giving kind of like counterintuitive advice to people when I'm asked, and I love opportunities like this one to share a little bit of my life with you. This is going to be a kind of story of like come across probably as advice on how to choose your career, but really what it is me retroactively justifying and rationalizing the career choices that I made when I was, in your shoes as I was graduating college. And so the title of this presentation is Choosing a Career You Don't Want. And that might make sense in a little bit, and you may agree with that thesis, and you may disagree, but I think it might foster some good communication questions after. John already gave me a great introduction. My name is Justin. I went to Calvin College, graduated in 2007. Upon graduation, I went to an accounting firm called Crowe Chiswick, and I wasn't an accountant. I was actually most accounting firms have consulting arms as well, and I was a technical IT programming consultant there for a few years, doing like high finance and public sector work at really big projects. Got a lot of experience. Then I went to a smaller agency, a consultancy called Pillar, and there we were doing kind of like what we called transformation work. It was really technical consulting where we were developing technology with engineering teams, but also attempting to revolutionize, change, innovate their processes, their code quality standards, the technologies that they were using, and so forth. And that was a lot of fun. That was really high impact. But it was, there were aspects about it, we'll get into that a little bit, that ultimately led me to co-found, my own business, Test Double, with my co-founder, Todd Kaufman. And we did that in 2011, and it's hard to believe that we're like coming up on our 9-year anniversary in just a couple weeks here. If I don't think I'm old in my head. I'm still like a 22-year-old college student. But one measure of how old you are is like how nothing really stays the same in life. For example, all 4 of these organizations have changed their names since I was at them. Calvin is now Calvin University, I'm told. I misspelled it there, but there it is. Crowe Chiswick became Crowe Horwath and then just cut it off entirely and just became Crowe. Pillar Technology was acquired by Accenture. And then this year, Test Double, we converted from a 2-person partnership to a 100% employee-owned ESOP plan, and so that required us to also reorganize as a corporation. So now that I feel old, I guess I can go back and kind of give free advice. Really, I'm here to test out a theory that I have about how people choose their college majors. And that is if you look at enrollment over time in the US of people who even go to college, and especially if you're familiar with the history of kind of like the post-war baby boom, something magical happened where the GI Bill was passed and a whole lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have had funds to enter college. Now, the GI Bill was by no means like an equitable way to get, college access to everybody, but it definitely, just in absolute terms, skyrocketed the number of people who were going to college. And it was all the sort of social norms that we think about with, choosing your career and, what a freshman experience is like. A lot of that was really kind of still stewing and forming and took 20, 30 years to kind of settle down. And the way that I think about it, because my parents sort of rode the line between 2 generations, is in this first phase of, the older baby boomers going to college, I think of my dad, and, to his father, he was, my grandfather was paying for my dad's college in order to have social upward mobility, to get more resources, to have a better lot in life than him. And so my grandfather was very coercive. He wanted my dad to get a medical degree, and my dad didn't want to go into being a doctor. So they negotiated, and my dad settled on being a dentist. My mom, however, she was born a little bit later, and she was kind of coming of age more as a Generation Xer. And when she went to college, my grandpa didn't really care too much. He was doing his own thing, and it was mostly a passion, an interest, a vocation for her, where she went into, the field of telecommunications, audiovisual, had a cable access television program for a while there. And so that was her, her choice. It was all based on her motivation, her drive. Now, if we back out and we ask, ourselves, certainly, teacher Mr. Nijelski here asks hey, what's the point of a career? You might think in terms of the economy, the point of a career is so that everyone can split up resources and, you make an income so that you can support a family and this and that. But if we make just one tweak to that question, and we ask instead of like, what's the point of your career? If we personalize the choice, then suddenly it's about, your interests, your passion, the fulfillment, the change you want to see in the world, yada, yada. And it's a really important thing to think about, like this kind of pivot inflection point that we had in America of like, first going to college at all, and then going to college because we were saying something about ourselves as individuals in order to choose our major and pick out our career, which you've all done, and thanks for the introductions earlier. So, if everyone's kind of randomly sorted, they're assigned or they're kind of coerced or nudged into a particular career, you'd probably assume that like some small minority of them are natural fits for that career, and some larger proportion of them are like not necessarily a great fit that was just picked for them. But, nowadays that everyone's self-selected, it's probably, we kind of have this ideological substrate that we don't talk a lot about. But you can just sort of assume that everyone picking out, their major of choice and doing the thing that they want, they're a perfect fit for their job. If we all are selecting what we want in life, then of course, we should probably all be pretty suited to that work. Now, of course, that's not perfect, and even just saying that it's obviously not true on its face. But I think that like under the surface, we kind of all operate, especially in college years and in how we talk about choosing a major and choosing a career in college. We talk about it in these terms. And because we talk about it in those terms, there's sort of an aspect to it is like, this is our fix to capitalism, right? Like, yes, you still have to work for a living, but at least everyone's doing what they want to do. And of course, there's a huge asterisk there too, because it's not everyone. It's still a minority of people who even get the chance to attend a college. But among the people who do, you can sort of have this have your cake and eat it too aspect to the college experience, where yes, you have to work for a living, but like if you really enjoy that work, is it really shouldn't feel like work and all that kind of stuff. Now, there's a few problems that I have with this whole kind of framing. One is that most people don't know what they want. The second thing is that, when you outsource your happiness to something else, like expecting to get it from an employer, that's kind of risky. And the third thing is that, like, conceptualizing careers as these things that serve an individual's sense of self-fulfillment and self-edification, that doesn't really scale. It doesn't even scale to teams, much less large organizations or broader economies. So let's start by talking about like how we don't really know what we want. If you ask yourself, who do you want to be when you grow up? For me, when I was asking that question of myself when I was in college, who I wanted to be was literally just not homeless. For whatever reason, I've had an irrational fear my entire life of being financially destitute. And so I wanted to be somebody who had financial security. And so that led me to, kind of pick out or fantasize about careers where I would be making a lot of money, no matter whether I liked the work or not. All I cared about, and I had this fascination with being a patent attorney, being a patent lawyer. Like I knew of one who was really wealthy, and I was like, oh, that seems like a slam dunk because it's work nobody wants to do, and it costs a lot of money. But when I, reframed the question or started to really dig in and ask myself, what do I want to do every day of my life? This is, a third of my existence or more. Then, I dig in, I talk to that person who was a patent attorney, and he'd be like, he hates his life. He's reading these massive, no offense, by the way, if you're going into patent law, but like he'd be reading these massive documents and nitpicking and finding like little tiny needles in a haystack of terms. And at the end of the day, there wasn't really a satisfaction of a job well done because, everything was so gray and would ultimately just sort of come down to negotiation and risk tolerance. Not a particularly satisfying day-to-day experience. And so ultimately, the way that I chose my major, and this part is pretty bang on true, is I listed off like 13 different things that I was interested in, and I ranked them by different aspects. And I did this actually before even entering college. First, how interested I was in the thing, how much money I thought I could make from it, how challenging or difficult, literally how good would I be at doing that thing based on my skills, and how much prior knowledge I had about that thing. Now, I could have sorted it by how interested I was, and if I had, I probably would have picked something like psychology or journalism. I could have sorted it by how much money I'd make, in which case I probably would have gone into pre-med. I was thinking about that for a while. I could have sorted it by challenge, in which case, I really liked the idea of learning to cook even, or otherwise maybe going into hardware engineering. And oddly, if you sort by ascending by prior knowledge, The two things I knew least about were computer science and Japanese, and I ultimately double majored in those two. Now, lots of people around that time, I would kind of talk to them about what I was majoring in, and they'd ask questions like, of course, like, why did you choose majors you know nothing about? And the true answer at the time was like, tuition's expensive, and I want to get my money's worth. Like, I had already been doing kind of like journalism on the web for a long time, and I just didn't feel like I'd really learned that much new stuff by majoring in journalism. And so, that was literally just thinking of how many dollars per credit hour I was paying. I just wanted to learn stuff I didn't know anything about. But now, looking back, I realized there was a subtextual question I wasn't thinking to ask, which is like, why did these things that I know nothing about even show up on this list at all? And because if you peel back the layer of the onion one more time, I think that what it comes down to is, how are you going to react in your career when things get tough? When things get difficult and hard and you want to quit or might, then how are you going to respond? And I think the answer is going to be different based on like why you chose the major that you chose. For example, if I just chose something that I was interested in, it's kind of like infatuation more than love. If success eludes me, if it's not quite what it was cracked up to be, I might literally have feelings of betrayal if it doesn't work how I want it to work. If I'm in it just for money, I might, spend 15 years getting to a point where I'm really making the salary that I always wanted to make, but I might be miserable. I might be working so much overtime. I burned all the bridges and relationships in my life. I might have even less hairline remaining than I do now. And is early retirement, is financial security really worth, just general happiness? I think most people would say no. And sometimes, if I just picked it based on how challenging it was, it might indeed be challenging, but sometimes challenging things are just hard for hardness' sake, and it might just be useless pain. And to find that out 20 years into a career that you can't really change easily sounds pretty demoralizing. So no, instead, if you just throw them all on a piece of paper, you might draw this line. And what's that line, you might ask? It's my skin. Because if these are things that I am considering, the reason that they even came up is that something about them got under my skin. Something about them irritated me. They're both computer science and Japanese are you got a big roll of tape and it seals over the edge and you can't find the edge and I can't give up. Even if just yesterday I had 10 packs of packing tape. They were all brand new, but one of them was stuck at the edge and I was sitting there for 20 minutes trying to recover that one roll of tape instead of picking up the next one. I just couldn't let go. So I guess the advice that I'd have here is to choose a field that's mildly irritating, and that you're never going to, feel completely satisfied, or feel like you've made it, or run out of things that you want to fix. So to take as an example, Japanese language. I don't use Japanese in my career right now, but it's still a really big part of my life. And one of the irritations that I always had with Japanese was it was so different. The pictographic kanji Chinese characters, the pronunciation, the grammar system. I was so irritated that I had no clue, how I'd say words. How do I say the word book? Or what does hon mean? And in the early days, that's enough when you're learning a language, but the thing about a language that's as different as Japanese is here I am, almost 20 years later after starting the language, and I'm still having basically the same mystery because I'm still trying to complete conversations and perform functions that are just one step beyond my comfort zone. Like, how do I say self-reliant? Or what does GQ Jisoku mean? So it's really fun and challenging that I'm just literally, I have this well of stuff that I apparently care about for some reason, and I cannot quit. I can't give it up, and I'm always going to have more to learn. And thinking more about Japanese, I studied Japanese at Calvin for a few years, but I wasn't learning fast enough. So I actually went and did a 6-month study abroad program in a city called Hikone, which is famous for being one of the 4 natural castles that we didn't destroy during World War II remaining. And a great city, made a lot of friends, had a great experience. But then, had my career start and I kind of lost all my Japanese. It wasn't that good to begin with. A few years ago, I found an application that helps you memorize Chinese characters. And so I was doing that literally every single day because I wanted to prove to myself that I could learn, the 2,000 Chinese characters that are kind of the basic middle school curriculum. And I actually got there. I learned all those characters. I learned all a lot of the words that they're used in, but I still didn't have an ability to produce it in conversation. And so I actually spent my spare time for the better part of a year building a custom application that forces me to challenge to practice production of all those words that I'd been learning. And after I got to the point where I could have pretty advanced conversations, I wanted to really try it out. And so I actually just got back in August from a year in Japan where I, challenged myself. I rented a house. I dealt with immigration, all the bureaucracy of moving to a new town, registering, lots of kind of processes and bureaucracies in Japan are much more complicated than they are here. It's still a very paper-heavy society. And so it was lots and lots of challenging language practice and, really stressed my ability to do anything, really. It was very, very tough, but very rewarding in hindsight. And then, we were also there when COVID broke out. And so understanding cultural differences, understanding, the xenophobia, to be honest, different reactions, knowing what it's like to be the other in a period of high stress. When, I grew up as a white guy in mostly, white neighborhoods, being the only white person in a 5-kilometer radius was a really, really valuable experience in a lot of ways, especially because I was often being judged or condescended by folks who didn't know me. Now, given all that, if like somebody off the street asked me, do I like Japanese? Yeah, I don't know. Like I love Japan. I love the food. I love all my friends there. But like whether I like the language or not is sort of besides the point. Like I am endlessly fascinated with learning the language, but it's not like a hobby. It's not like something I think to reach out for entertainment, for example. And so I think of this as like, agitation as motivation. And the same thing happens as I approach software development as a programmer. If you follow me on Twitter, I am constantly complaining about all the neat ways that software breaks. And I have a really, really bad track record because apparently everyone tells me that like stuff breaks for me a lot more often. I don't know if it's just that I have a higher attention to detail or if it's that I, push things at the edges or if I just, complain more. It's probably a little bit of all three. But that irritation with how I feel like most software I use is awful has driven me forward in understanding all the ways that software fails me and fails other people. And so my co-founder, Todd, he'd see my 1,000 complaints about software and he would just, inflect them and say, well, everything that you find is a problem in life, is a potential solution to sell to somebody else. And so that's how we found, a consulting company based on the premise that we're here to improve how the world writes software, to have a positive impact in the world through, the problem identification that seems to come completely naturally to me as I just try to get my computer to do stuff. And so I really encourage people, especially when you're still in a position to be able to think about what you want to be doing in your career, to find something that you can get worked up about. Find something that, it doesn't have to be something you love necessarily, but find something that you can get exercised about. And, that's a little bit about why we don't necessarily know what we want, and one unorthodox way to pick something. Next up, I want to talk about why outsourcing your happiness to somebody else is risky. When you're growing up, I'm sure, I hope somebody told you at some point that you can be anything you want to be. Maybe that was an astronaut or a rock star or a ninja. I mean, of course, when my mom told me this, she probably meant like a plumber or a fireman or something. But in reality, we having this ideology that like the job exists to serve us and fulfill our needs, whether that's emotional or from a sense of fulfillment, I think it's worth asking is it too much to ask of our job to give us a sense of fulfillment at the end of the day? And I actually think of this just like I think of anything when you're talking about work-life balance. Stuff that you expect from work, your salary, 401k, professional development, stuff that you have to deal with in life, your housing, your entertainment, travel, fitness, health, diet, and all that. It can be easy to negotiate. The lines have blurred in a lot of ways, especially for this generation, between work and life. And of course, now with half the planet working from home at the moment, this has never been more true. But I have seen a trend ever since I graduated college of employers and employees both considering moving the fulfillment of your self into the work column. I think that's bad. To illustrate, why do people hate car sales? There's a lot of reasons why people hate car sales. I just bought a new car, and I really, really hate having the conversation with them. And one of the reasons is this quadrant that can be used. Because if I go into a car dealership and I say, hey, I really care about my monthly payment, or if I really care about my interest rate, or I really care about how much my down payment's going to be, or I care about like the overall price of the vehicle, if I'm financing it through them, then they can, turn all of these other knobs, each one of those things that I just said. If they can get me that monthly payment that I want, but they push my loan way back out, for example. And so it's a way to exploit, your customer by taking advantage of the fact that we can only keep so many variables in our head at once. Now, when you think about work, every single fringe benefit might sound really good, but you add them all up. Especially if you consider something like as important as your own sense of self or fulfillment, that's another knob that you're putting in the control of your employer to twist for you. And so I'm careful not to do that because it opens the door to you being exploited. A lot of companies, they put on, big retreats, like inspirational speakers, concerts, stuff to like get people motivated, make people feel connected. And that can all be really good. But if we come to rely on it to fulfill like our own emotional needs, it's one way people get so snookered into pyramid schemes, because if you're, looking at the emotional side, we can kind of explain away other stuff or rationalize away, ethical problems or, unsustainability or overwork or not being treated or compensated fairly. Same goes for kind of perks and amenities like foosball, ping pong, beer kegs, snacks and stuff. They might appeal to your sense of like having fun at work and blurring the line, but of course by blurring that line, they might expect you even kind of silently to shift your expectations that you always be at work and work late hours and kind of more and more get your identity intertwined with, the deadline that you're under, for example. In 2007, when I was graduating from college, I had an opportunity to actually fly to Google to interview in person at their Googleplex, and it was, it was an amazing experience, a fantastic HQ. They had a Gold's Gym, basically on site. This cafeteria, 3 meals a day, it was all gourmet, everything. They had a 100-foot rule at the time, which is that like no developer's chair should be more than 100 feet from like food and beverage, refreshments, washing and laundry machines on site, shuttle buses. But I asked, I was like, wow, this is so amazing, but I'm going to be a newlywed moving here, and, my wife won't have a job or anything, so if I'm here all day, like, can she come when I have breakfast or come for dinner or something? And they said no. And, like, it was a really hard no. It was a no that told me, like, the reason for all those amenities was to keep me planted at Google all day long. And that was a pretty big turnoff, to be honest. And I've kind of been wary of companies that kind of overplay the creature comforts since then, because it always costs something. So the other thing that I'm careful about is like my friends, colleagues, it is just common, given this sort of social ideology and how we think about work, to advise our friends or to receive advice about like a job that might be perfectly adequate. Maybe you're making good money, you're doing something useful, you're content at the end of the day, but you're not necessarily happy about it. Like a lot of people see that as a problem statement. Like you should find something that like, drives your passions and stuff. And I feel like that's just unnecessary shame. You can find fulfillment in all kinds of ways in your work. You can find it in your life, but the most important thing is that you're the one in the driver's seat, that you're, self-actualized and owning the experience of whether or not you find your work fulfilling and not relying on it to be handed to you. The most important takeaway here is that you not give control of your emotional well-being to somebody else. So an analogy that I've used for my entire career is to think in terms of, I want to have a sense of like the wind at my back. I want to have a sense of progression as I'm going through my career. I want to have like a dopamine drip of feeling like I'm gradually getting somewhere. And, I often term this in terms of taking the stair steps to success as opposed to taking the elevator. Because when you take the stairs, you learn everything as you go. You understand how you got there. If somebody else needs help, you'll know the way. But like when you take the elevator to success, you might get successful right off the gate, but you won't necessarily know how to help other people get to where you got. I think about this a lot, and it's funny that I already had that mentality when I graduated, because I had an opportunity that forced me to choose between these two paths. One was to co-found a agency that is actually not that dissimilar from the agency that I have now. I'd be billing $100 an hour. I'd only be working 32 hours a week. I'd be mostly in control of my own schedule. It'd be pretty laid back. But, I hadn't really, I don't think that I was ready. I don't think that I knew enough to be effective or valuable in that role. And I certainly knew that there was a risk that my learning would stop, that I'd have too many like blinders. I wouldn't have enough experience and breadth to really be, fulfilled if that was my lot in life right out the gate. I also had a salaried position, $50,000 a year, so like a lot less money. Also an expectation of working almost 50 hours a week and almost nonstop travel week after week after week. And this would be consulting and doing stuff that I had no idea how to do, no training, and organizations that were really complex, scary, bureaucratic, political, and like emotionally charged. And so, of course, I picked that one. And that's where I went when I graduated. And I learned a ton. And so if you think of that first job, and I followed this company, the first one, the one that would have paid me a lot of money out the gate, and it's true, I would have made that, but like they've mostly just stayed in stasis over this time, and the other people at that company are completely comfortable with that, and that's good and that's great for them. It just wouldn't have been right for me, knowing what I was looking for in a career, which was a sense of growth, of advancement. Because, and this is a kind of a truism from an author who's popular in our community named Andy Fowler. Boy, I think I got that name wrong. Named Andy. 10 years of doing the same thing does not equal 10 years of experience. And I hope this rings true to you, but especially as time goes on and you start to look at people's resumes, you realize that it is very possible to just time in, check out every day doing the same thing, and not only not necessarily grow in that role and learn things, but actually atrophy a little bit and kind of fall into such lanes of comfort that you cannot deal with change as much as you used to. Meanwhile, my career, if you consider like, sort of my share of bringing stuff in, it gets kind of confusing having owned a business, but like in the beginning, I was not pulling very much money, right? Like I'm totally happy. I was thrilled to get that job offer, but overall, I viewed it as the period in my career where I'd be getting a lot of repetition to learn how to do stuff by just immersing myself in very hard situations. For the next stage of my career so far, I was really focused on building. I was taking those things I learned, building conference presentations, open source software, networking, building my network, helping new clients in more advanced ways, coaching, advising, and that sort of thing. And now, where I am for the last few years at TestDouble is really more about scaling that organization up, making it sustainable and able to outlast me and my co-founder someday. I had a great interview with a future VP of sales yesterday that I want to hire. I have, a director of marketing, a manager of marketing position that I'm looking to hire, and both of those things are going to take a lot of stuff off my plate, which I appreciate, but it also is going to be me ceding control to other people to go and fuel the next stage of the company's growth without me having so much direct control over that, and I couldn't be happier. But if you look at this chart, right, it looks a lot more like the stairs, and every single year, my company could have completely failed, and I would have felt awesome, because it was so much higher than I ever expected to be. And even, it's true today, I'm always shocked by how great our company is doing, and I'm sure next year I'll be shocked too, but I'm not counting on it. So I'm just, always in a state of fulfillment, even though I'm, generally kind of a sourpuss and usually in a bad mood. When I do zoom out, I'm pretty blown away by how lucky I am and how fortunate I am. And behind all this is like, I don't really believe you can fix a thing unless you know why it's broken. A lot of jobs, in the services economy, most of us are like, we're working to solve somebody's problem, but there's a lot of jobs where you're just sort of providing a solution that somebody else wrote, and you're just kind of papering over a symptom. But to like really fix a root cause and like address an emotional, real, tangible need that a customer has, you have to like really understand why it's broken. And so that's when my focus, over the course of my career is like really understanding not just like, hey, how do I build a thing for a client, but how do I like get behind the problem and the emotional needs behind what they're asking me for. And so I think of my brain almost as like a pattern recognition machine where, I'm handed problems and then, problem one gives me solution one. I get another problem. I come up with another solution. I get another problem and another solution. I do this enough that a similar looking problem will come my way and my brain will interrupt me. And before I even go and build it and figure it out again, I can actually advise and give like, reasoned predictions and forecasts of like, oh, your solution is probably going to look like this, and short circuit that so that I can be in more of a consultative role and help out. And so that requires that you find a field that you can't stand, that you want to dive into, like asking why questions, and then be comfortable sitting in it long enough, being comfortable with that discomfort to really, really learn what's going on at the layer beneath what everyone's telling you. And that's one reason why I recommend going into consulting. I've been a consultant my entire career, so I'm absolutely biased. But if you find an opportunity to find a services firm that does the thing that you're interested in, you will probably get a lot more repetitions. You'll probably get a lot more opportunities. Like maybe in 1 year you do 10 projects, whereas like a lot of people might do 1 project a year. That's just so much more data to feed that pattern recognition software in your brain to be able to, at the other end of it, give people good advice based on having just a wealth of knowledge and project experience. Additionally, don't get too hung up on, like, when you're comparing first offers, don't get too hung up on salary. This is probably rote advice, but you'll never have as big of a learning potential as when you're starting your career. It's, everyone has, their family constraints and other constraints, but it's pretty typical that like those aren't going to go down over time. And so if you want to have a career that is going to really, really broaden and deepen your skill set and your perspectives, front loading activities that are going to maximize your learning and prioritizing that above just raw dollars that you're going to earn is, in my opinion, almost always good advice. All right, so the third thing I want to talk about is that like self-fulfillment as a frame for how we think about careers doesn't scale. And fundamentally, it's because it's just selfish. This might sound obvious, but in practice, you see it all the time. You might use the word selfish or entitled, or you might just sort of see things through a lens that makes sense to you and to no one else, but it isolates people, puts them in silos. And at its greatest extreme, you could imagine somebody maybe starts a business just for their own sake. They want to make bubble tea just the way that they want to make bubble tea, and they don't care what anyone else thinks. And so, a customer sees it, says, no, I would not like that bubble tea. It does not taste good. But like if you're in it for yourself and you don't care what the customer thinks, you're going to keep cranking out the same bubble tea, and you're going to keep getting rejected over and over again. And you'll just keep on doing it. Even if all your customers go away, and your bubble tea business goes bankrupt, I've seen people in this situation, because I know a lot of founders of businesses who effectively do this, with things more, nuanced maybe than bubble tea. And then when they fail, they get upset, but like they're not angry at themselves or their failure to like get good feedback or to course correct when customers didn't like their thing. They're mad at the customers for not having liked the thing at the first place. Like it's just this rotten selfishness at its core. And so when you start to broaden your perspective and you think about how you're not happy in your career and you want your career to be a certain way, yet we all operate in this context assuming everyone chose their career and everyone's happy with their career, like it should be on its face obviously false. So don't assume that other people are necessarily happy with their career either. In fact, it's usually safer to assume the opposite. And so when I'm in a room and people and I'm feeling miserable, I always use that as a reminder to like think that like, oh, maybe they are suffering from imposter syndrome too, or maybe they're worried about their skill set, or maybe, politics are too charged and are shutting down this person, and so on and so forth. Everyone brings their own kind of needs, baggage, disillusionment, upset, disengagement to the table when they show up at work. It's not just you. And as a result, even though your job description might say that you produce widgets, if all you did was focus on building the thing and totally ignore that the rest of your team was a train wreck and no one was getting anything done, and there was tons of friction in every single process, like you wouldn't be able to do that job of building widgets very effectively. So you have to think about it in terms of your job is also the people. And that, when you talk about it in those terms, especially with, sciences and technology, where people just want to shut out the world and focus on their computer monitor, it's easy to just say, no, that's not my job, right? It's not my job to move the cardboard out of the street. I just paint the yellow lines. But ultimately, in the long run, it is good for you to think of taking care of all of the people that you interact with and work with and setting them up for success. It's in your long-term interest, because if you do that, not only are they going to like you and maybe pay you back, but even just the system is going to run with less friction and you'll be able to get more done and be happier about it. And so I really have always viewed my second job as understanding the needs of all of the people that I interact with and seeking to address those things as best as I can, even if it's not directly myself. Maybe it's just getting them a resource, introducing them to somebody, or facilitating a conversation between two people who have conflict. And you know what? that is actually on its own probably a much more fulfilling activity than just producing widgets. So I think about that a lot. I'm always trying to see, how do I make somebody else lucky? How do I make everybody that I'm working with win in this particular, high stakes situation? And so one thing, when we talk about empathizing with people, working with people, a lot of people fall back on the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And the thing about the golden rule is that it actually doesn't work that well. Here's an example. So this is me and my co-founder Todd, and we have very different communication styles. So if he were to say like, hey, I need an apple, I would probably reply, knowing me, well, I validate your concern that you need an apple. I totally understand. There's this farm that I know. It's really great. They're awesome. They're friends. And then they have this particular species of tree that they bred and so forth. And then anyway, yeah, here's your apple. And I also got you all these other apple-related products like ciders and juices and stuff because I figured you might want those. And, Todd's going to roll his eyes because he's in a hurry. He's trying to get stuff done. He just wanted the damn apple. But, for me, it was really important to kind of provide all this extra context as well as emotional validation. Meanwhile, if I needed something from him, I'd fall all over myself. I still do this, 12 years into working with him. I feel bad for asking this, but lately I've been feeling like I'm not getting enough oranges and I've been losing sleep over, but it's totally okay if you're busy. And, then like, what does Todd do? He just gives me the orange. And, that is explicitly what I asked, but all of that context around it was, indicating that I have some sort of emotional need, validation, or there's something else going on. And, I feel like I wasn't heard if I actually just get the thing that I asked for, which is, I'm sure, separately frustrating to him. So instead, I recently learned a phrase a couple years ago, the platinum rule. And this is just a slight tweak, which is instead of interacting with people the way that you want to be interacted with, interact with them in the way that they need to be interacted with for them to succeed, for them to get to the next step. And when you think about the platinum rule, like this exchange would change, right? So like in this case, Todd says he needs an apple, I just give him the apple. If he just says thanks with like no capitalization, punctuation, or emoji, I know that he actually means thank you. When I say thanks with no punctuation, capitalization, or emoji, it probably means I'm annoyed somehow, because I always need to have a whole lot of extra kind of clutter to convey my emotional state. But he'd be happy just getting the apple, right? And if I give him that big long-winded thing again, he's, learned about me enough by now to kind of give me the context that I need, give me the thing that I'm asking for, but also tell me that it's going to be okay when I need an attaboy or a pat on the back or just somebody to listen to me. And that, strengthens our relationship. So, when you ask a question like, what do other people need in the room, you probably don't know. And unless you get really good at just having one-on-one relationships with people and listening really well, which is, of course, a great skill, one thing that companies do, and I make fun of it all the time because it's usually silly, is take personality inventory systems. These are quizzes that you take, like DISC or StrengthsFinder are popular. And what they do is they kind of typify people. They put people into buckets and they say, like, this is what this person is like and this is how you should be treated. The one that we've been using at our company is called Personalysis. We got a coach that helps us kind of understand and communicates and coaches us through the lens of everyone's different results. And it's like, none of these are rocket science. None of these are perfect or correct necessarily, but they take something that was 100% ambiguous before, which is like everyone's emotional needs and the differences between our personalities, and reduces it maybe to like 70% ambiguous. It at least gives us language to use to talk about how we interact in ways that, otherwise we'd have nothing. Oh, so-and-so's in a bad mood, or so-and-so's a jerk. Right? That's not very helpful. But understanding, they've got, this particular quality where they're hard charging and they're very focused and they're task oriented and they're action oriented, like it makes more sense that they don't have a whole lot of extra emoji at the end of their chat messages. In Personalysis, this is what my profile looks like. None of this should make any sense to you, but basically like it breaks down, and the one on the left is how I engage with my work, the one in the middle is how I communicate, and the one on the right is how I think and make decisions. And I'll just point out like the yellow is like how social you are. And so like I typically, when I'm engaging with my best work, I'm actually not that social. I like to just sit down and write code. when I'm communicating, I'm still not that social. I don't, like seek a lot of consensus in the room necessarily. That doesn't concern me. And then when I'm making decisions, it does not even cross my mind that like other people should be involved. I spent, like all weekend building something, and then my wife was upset because we didn't spend any time together, and I felt bad at that moment because I didn't want to make her feel bad. But like it never even like went off in my brain when I was just in my hidey hole building stuff. And so that's a little bit of how I'm wired. And so, when I'm having the conversation with Todd, and I guess we're playing Animal Crossing or something, and he needs pears, I know what his profile looks like. I understand what those graphs mean, and I'm thinking about it. And he knows what my profile looks like, and we can, negotiate that conversation with a significantly less friction and more empathy. And additionally, we've got this done for like our entire staff. The names are removed here, but you can see we got a lot of programmers, which means we have a lot of blue, which is like introspective, empathetic, like fact finding, and also a lot of yellow because they're all consultants. So they're in consultative roles where they're providing advice. And so our people are probably more social than the average programmer. And, all in all, this kind of works. The two things are the most important is just like be mindful of it and try to do a good job, do right by people and serve their emotional needs and treat that as part of your job. And two, like go out of your way to create a vocabulary to use so you can talk about this stuff that like sinks beneath the surface and actually surface it and start to defeat and start to unwind this culture that like everybody's job is just a one-on-one relationship from which they like, receive their sense of self-fulfillment. No, like that has to be built. And the way to build it is by focusing on the people and the experiences that you're around. So, people, they don't know what they want. Outsourcing your happiness is not, recommended. And of course, just focusing on your own selfish needs doesn't scale as you start looking at a team, an organization, company, and customers. Overall, I'd say like don't sweat the big stuff. Like if you're not thinking that your company is the best company in the world, it's fine. It's you'll probably be at a different one in a few years. If a project is like big deadline, if it's looking like it's going to fail, like it's okay. Like lots of projects fail, and odds are if that one fails, it won't be because of something you did. It's probably for a lot of stuff that's outside your control. So like again, retain control of the things that are inside your purview and use those things to drive your emotional state and your sense of validation. And don't hang your hat too much on the stuff that's outside that control. Instead, I just focus on each and every individual day. And that means for me, because I'm motivated by my own agitation, find something I can get worked up about. Then shut out the world and spend as much time as I can without notifications turned on, without Twitter or Slack or anything else to just do something productive that I can be proud of and get something done. And also remember the importance of making sure that other people are taken care of and other people have what they need to have that same success for themselves. And just trust that it'll pay back someday, and it totally does. And similarly, I think in terms of how fast are we learning, you could think of it in terms of placing small bets instead of big bets. So, betting it all on one horse to win a race is, risky, right? Like you might only be able to make 5 or 6 bets on saying, I'm going to join the startup, take some equity, and I'm going to like just bet the next 10 years of my life that it's going to be the next unicorn $1 billion company. And you can do that. Just know that 99% of the time they fail. Or you could go to the penny slots, and that's kind of what I've tried to do, is like, even inside of a 2-year project, let's turn it into as many tiny little experiments, as many small experiences, as many chances to mentor somebody or be mentored by somebody, and have as many little feedback loops as possible to improve myself, improve the experience of other people on the team, to learn, and, even in the case of the big bet failing, I've still won, lots and lots of those little penny slot bets. So it's not necessarily a failure for me if, the bigger company doesn't take off and have a massive IPO or something. In the end, it's all about understanding yourself, right? Like, I'm a firm believer in understanding and introspecting yourself enough to know whether any given thing that you're about to commit to is an example of you stretching yourself into new things that you're not comfortable with but you think are valuable versus doubling down on something that you know is a strength. I think both are appropriate at different times and different seasons. Like, for example, you see how little yellow I have, but how many words have I spoken in over the course of this presentation? Like, I am not a social person, but somehow I give a lot of conference presentations, and I'm currently an interim director of sales and director of marketing, and I'm on the phone all day, every day. And do I like any of that stuff? Absolutely not. But is it what I found is this is the best way for me to have the biggest impact on as many people as possible. And I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity that, now I can start to think about like, hey, what's my next chapter look like? After we get other leaders in place, maybe there's a way for me to kind of take better advantage, revisit my creativity and build stuff again and double down on the things that I think I'm strong about. So anyway, my name's Justin again. You can find me, feel free to shoot me an email for any questions at all. It could be presentation advice. It could be about career stuff. It could be anything. I'm also, just my last name is on Twitter. That's my username. And feel free to connect me on LinkedIn. Just write a note saying you're from this class. I get a lot of LinkedIn spam. And thank you so much for your time today.